Let me first of all welcome you and begin with these words. The Bible says that when Jesus died, death was destroyed. He canceled out the power of death to separate us from God. It also says that when Jesus then rose from the grave, he, Christ, restored our possibility for eternal life with God. This same Jesus will come again in glory. Romans 8, 1 and 2 says this, "Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, because through Christ, the law of the Spirit who gives life has set you free from the law of sin and death." I want to welcome everyone here this morning. This is a very special and very important moment, and I'm glad you are here. And in behalf of the Smith family, I want to welcome you and thank you for all of your care and support. The care and support that was shown last night was overwhelming for the family, and it was incredible. And your presence here today continues that show of support. Thank you. Let's begin with a prayer. Would you bow in prayer with me? Almighty God, you brought us into this life. You give purpose for the days that we have been allotted, and you know our needs before we ask. Give to us, this gathered group of family and friends, a peace and assurance that your grace is absolutely sufficient for the events of this day. That you had written down these events from the beginning of time. Speak to us your message about the meaning of life and the purpose of death, because we need to hear it today. Help us to live as those who are prepared to die. And when we stop and think about the length of our own days, that we will face that prospect of death with a confidence that comes not from our own abilities and tendencies to be good enough, but that a confidence will come from a rock-solid relationship with Jesus, your Son, who paved the way for us to live in your presence forever. Amen. I want to read one scripture for as we continue in this service. This comes from Psalms 139. It says this in verse 13, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast are the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would not outnumber the grains of sand. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." My name is Dan Glover. I'm the lead pastor here at Tip City. And I want to begin this morning the comments that will be had and in the family, and then you'll have an opportunity just from where you're sitting to share an episode, a moment, a thought about Chuck. But I want to begin. Today, as we celebrate and honor this life of Chuck Smith, Charles Chuck Smith, who has touched so many lives in Tip City. Chuck is a husband, as a father, as a grandfather, but also as a dentist. He used the platform of dentistry and a dentist chair to touch thousands and thousands of lives. And I was one of those. I was one of the many thousands who sat in a dentist chair. Anybody or stood next to one with Chuck close? But my real experience of Chuck was not in the dentist chair, because that was only a few years ago that I sat in his chair. My experience of Chuck Smith as a dentist was minimal. My real time with Chuck has been in this last year. Following his retirement from Health Park, or whatever someone might call the last couple of years that he has spent, Chuck somehow found out about my interest in community partnerships. And because of the 24/7 policy in his dentistry, when my phone vibrated and I looked down and Chuck Smith's name was on my phone, a number that I kept handy just in case I needed to call him. It was always me calling him. Him calling me as a pastor, that was a first. We talked briefly in that first phone call, which was about a year ago, and we scheduled a time for him to come in. When he showed up, I noticed two very distinct things as we began to talk. One was that I was in the presence of a man who was very kind and very soft-spoken. He listened carefully to everything I said. He probed me with gentle questions. As I thought about it, it was like a soft ping of sonar, checking to see how deep my capacities were. He was good at this kind of conversation, but I could feel the distinct impression that what was happening was more than mere chit-chat between me and him. Because of his quiet approach as two professionals talking to each other, one could have easily missed that I was being sized up. Anybody relate to that? The second thing that I noticed was that as the conversation progressed, I was allowed to see a side of Chuck Smith that many of his colleagues in dentistry, and certainly his family, was quite familiar with. The intellectual horsepower began to increasingly show itself. I was trying to think of a way to describe this, and the only thing I came up with was the State Farm commercial where the two guys pull up to the light, one trying to save his discount and the other was a souped up green muscle car. And they roll their windows down and the guy looks over at him and goes, "You want to go?" And I want you to know I was not the one in the green car. That analogy sort of breaks down a little bit though, at a couple of levels, in that Chuck was not loud and he was not in my face. But he was ready to go. And it captured the essence, that commercial captured the essence of what I slowly felt happening in the room as we talked. We set up a second, and then a third, and then a fourth, and a fifth, and we ended up meeting about 8 times over the last year. I invited him into a community partnership meeting. This was a group of people who cared deeply about the survival and the developmental needs of children and teenagers in Tip City. Cared deeply about them, and we were focused in on how we could creatively begin to meet some of those needs. And it was clearly a perfect fit for Chuck. But what I now know is that those meetings, the 8 that I had with him, along with all the other brushes with him as we went to different meetings, were for me. Those meetings were for me. They were for me to witness a man who was readjusting himself for what could be the next chapter in his life. with all of the accumulated skills and all of the accumulated knowledge of a life jam-packed full of experience at his disposal. He was looking for the next place where he would use it all. He was not done. It was during these meetings with Chuck that I began to more fully appreciate him and this town that is full of individuals who will not be done at 65 or 70 or even 75. And they won't go and they won't spend their time just playing golf or overwintering in Sarasota. He was looking for a way to continue to invest in this beloved town, this county, and this area. That's who I got to witness. That's who I got to see. I witnessed a man whose physical strength, his mental horsepower, and his social network was still strong. Like David wrote in Psalm 139, this man was formed in his mother's womb, and his life was a testimony that he did not and he would not let it slip into idle or neutral. He just wouldn't. In this way, whether Chuck knew it or not, his dedication to the physical side of life, he was actually living as a biblical man should live. When Scripture says this in 1 Corinthians, do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You are bought with a price. Therefore, honor your bodies. Honor God with your bodies. The Bible there is reminding people the importance of taking care of this one body that we have. Not something that Chuck Smith needed to be reminded of. It just wasn't. And his actions of passing on to his children that desire to learn and to gain knowledge and to pass that on to his grandchildren, as well as the many who apprenticed under his watchful eye, some of you sitting here right now today, was also a very biblical way of living. King David did it with his son Solomon when we read in just one section of Proverbs, verse 2, listen to the counsel that a father gives to his son. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding. Indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as for silver or gold, or search for it as a hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for those who seek it. There was something tenacious in David's words there that reflected itself to me in those short 8 meetings that I had with Chuck in the last year. A man who was not at the end of his life, nor acted like it. Now, mind you, they weren't short meetings. Anybody relate to that? The man came prepared for every meeting that we had. And as the engine started revving up, that horsepower started revving up, the meetings got longer. But it was fascinating to me. It was like I was being invited into a secret chamber of learning by this man. This is who I came to know in this last year. Who do you know? Chuck Smith to be. And yes, the spiritual side of life did come up in our meetings. I never experienced defensiveness on his part. I more experienced a willing sparring partner. He threw the first punch. When early in one of the first meetings, he said, now Dan, I want you to know I'm really not interested in hearing about what God did 2,000 years ago. What I want to know is, what is the church doing today? When he threw that punch, it caught air with me. When I came back with this statement, I said, so Chuck, tell me what you know of what the church is doing today. He sat back in the chair and looked at me. I think I earned another meeting by that statement. He was not defensive with me about God and the Bible. I think what he was frustrated with the overall church, not Tip City Church, but the overall church and its seemingly slow responses to the world's needs. But over time, he began to open up more and siding with the things that we were looking at through the prospects of this community partnership and planning that was starting to form around the things we were talking about. There was one meeting that I remember. I remember it because he was getting up to leave. And he was reaching for his jacket. It was hanging on a hook right by my office door. And he looked right at me and he said, you know, Dan. And then he paused, put his jacket on. He moved closer to the entrance of the doorway. He said, I do believe in God. And his voice sort of trailed off. It was a moment that I would only hear one time. Like a man confessing to his priest. Something that he was not used to hearing himself say. That he moved to the open door and positioned himself right outside the door, and he turned and he looked at me. I had not responded at that moment. He turned and looked at me, and our eyes locked, and I said, Chuck, I believe you. And he nodded, and there was this acknowledgement like the deed had been done. And then he walked out of my office. I went on a short sabbatical this early summer, only to come back and find that he had started attending church on Sundays. He'd even started attending a small group, one of the small groups in our church. My first Sunday that I came back from sabbatical, I saw him, and I must have had this incredibly surprised look on my face to see him. And he looked at me with that ever-present grin on his face, and the grin broke into kind of a short burst of laughter. And he said, it's okay, David. It was my choice. In these 8 months that I've gotten to know Chuck Smith, I saw a man who had laid his aim on the physical side of life, the intellectual side of life, the professional side of life, and the family side of life. And now he was laying his aim on the spiritual side of life. That's a life well lived. Let's pray. Almighty God, you are so creative. You are so amazing. You have made all of us so incredibly different. And to brush shoulders with a man like Chuck has been an honor in my life. And today, as we celebrate this life of his, the lives that he has touched, God, we thank you. We thank you that you let him pass through our lives. And the memories will be forever. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Now we're going to have the opportunity to hear from some members of the family. And children, if you want to come up.
Thank you all for coming. And thank you so much for coming last night. That was absolutely wonderful to see so many patients, doctors, staff, friends, family. We so appreciated it. I'm pretty sure everybody knows me, but I'm Chuck's oldest, and I am very grateful to my family that they are going to let me talk to you and share some stories about our dad. And there's a few things I want you to know about him, and a lot of them you already know. You already know that he had an incredible love for his family, and you probably already know that he had such a heart for this community. He was such a Tipp Cityan to the core. And the third thing that you're going to find out a lot more about, at some level, but I hope to tell you some fun stories, is that he also had an incredible vision for dentistry and how that impacted so many of us. And I had the incredible opportunity to get a front row seat at some of the fun things that we got to do in this very small town. So as I was thinking about what I wanted to say to everyone, I think everything fell under two lessons that I think are important, and I think we can learn from my dad today. And the first of those is that people can and will change. And that is, if you really think about what that means and how that my dad's life, he believed that in so many ways, and not just the belief, but what you saw action out of that. The second lesson is, and this was instilled in him very young by his parents, is that if you have been given gifts, then you are to use those gifts. You are expected, it is mandatory, it is not an option. And again, I think those are the couple of lessons, and every single story and every single piece of my dad's life that I'm going to tell you about today will fall under one or the other, or most likely both of those. So I want to start and talk a little bit about how people can change, and they will. Uh-oh, am I moving around too much?
You're good.
In our family, there was a rule. You don't lie, and you don't hit, and everything else is negotiable. And that is true, especially for my brother and my sister, who negotiated everything. And I think a great story of how this began is actually how my parents actually got married. So this is an amazing story. So my mother grew up very Catholic, and my father was a Protestant. And back in those days, that was a very difficult situation to actually end up getting married from those two circumstances. And so there were, as you would do when you're going to get married, there were a variety of meetings with the priest. And my dad was in Virginia, and he would drive up to Ohio, to Columbus, to Reynoldsburg, to meet with the priest and talk with my mom and go through this process of having these meetings. And part of the expectation of those meetings is that the Catholics expected that you would raise your children Catholic. And my dad was not going to agree to that, because he wanted his children to have the choice to think for themselves, to make those decisions, and to choose what would be the right religion for them. And the part of this that makes me so amazed is these are theoretical children. We did not exist, obviously, at this point. So he has meeting after meeting after meeting, and this priest finally says, Chuck, just say you're going to do it. You don't have to actually raise your kids Catholic, just say it. And for those of you who knew my father, he wasn't going to do that, even to get married to the woman that he fell in love with. So eventually he decided he would write a letter to the bishop, and that bishop granted them a special dispensation so that they could get married. First very early lesson that people can and will change, even the bishop of a Catholic church many moons ago. Another example of Dad's beliefs in how people can change, and his influence in that, is his incredible focus on education. in our family. So we have my sister, the doctorate, and my brother and I with masters, and that was an incredibly valuable piece. But far more interesting than the education officially is how my father educated us at home. So I somehow escaped this. I'm convinced that I was clearly the far better behaved child and didn't need this level of parenting. But for my brother and my sister, you gave me the mic, we're just getting started. So the way this worked is at some point Wendy, I'm sure, did something wrong. And I'm sure Dad only found out about 1 out of the 30 times that was happening. But so one of the punishments that Wendy had was that she would have to watch a PBS documentary and then write a paper and answer questions about that. And then the next round, so when Adam came along, he'd even improved on that, riff of, okay, Adam had to read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And then not only was Dad had delegated how that work was going to go, he was going to have Wendy quiz Adam to make sure that he had actually read the book and could answer the questions. Not surprisingly for any of those of us here that know my sister, she never read the book in the first place. Adam read the book and of course knew all the answers. But again, talk about creative parenting. Who does that? The other really important part of the education and how people change is that, my mom grew up in a very strict, very, very serious family, and fun was not a priority. And so when she and Dad got together, and again, I remember how my dad did not have a smile on his face, they very intentionally made fun a part of our entire childhood. I mean, that was just as much of a priority for us as it was that we expected we better get straight A's and we better get through college. And it was just not even an option. We didn't even know it was an option, but it was to also have fun. And fun we had from all the big things, right? The big fun beach vacations in Florida, all the stories. In fact, it was kind of fun. I think I was telling Dan, we went to church at a church in Dayton while we grew up, and we would, kid you not, we would show up late. We would walk to the front row, because of course when you show up late in church, the front row is always magically open, and we would stand in front and sing, and back then we had the hymnals, and my dad and I would stand next to each other, and I'm sure he did this with you guys too. He'd decide he didn't like that song, we'd sing something else in the front of the church. The other fun part is, my dad loved to tell stories, right? I bet so many of you got so many stories in that dental chair, over and over and over, probably so sick to hear about his kids, over and over. And at some point we had to call them Chuckisms, because so many of the stories, they didn't have to be true. And in fact, it was probably better that we just improve them with time. Some of my favorite stories are still, and I won't probably get this right, which won't make any difference either, but that there was a Thanksgiving that Wendy supposedly got a turkey leg stuck in her mouth, right, the long way, and I think she was 2 or whatever, and of course, Mom and Wendy, I think Dad told this story, we were just watching this video the other night, Dad told this story at Wendy's wedding, right, the toast at Wendy's wedding, and of course Mom and Wendy are both that's not true, that never happened, we're we don't care, it's such a good story. Since I get to be the one up here speaking today, I want to also share some amazing stories, because my brother and sister and I, but I want to talk about them, you can see my dad in how they live their lives, in every piece of it. So for my little sister, who is this ridiculous, incredible athlete, my parents were always the original health nuts. And things you may or may not know about Wendy, you may know that she played tennis through high school and all through college. She still runs half marathons and places, by the way, in Nashville. Incredible athlete. My dad, even in this last month, has been getting Wendy's consult on nutrition so that he can then have meetings up here to make sure that he's meeting her level of nutrition. Wendy completely embodies his attitude around health and athleticism and activity, and she instills that in her children every single day. She also went to Ohio Northern like my grandfather did. She also is a pharmacist like my grandfather. But just like my dad, my sister chose to work at the system level in a hospital to make sure she could influence healthcare. She is working for the largest hospital system in the country, in their headquarters, and she has done some incredible things. She is totally like Dad with this whole prevention thing. She is driving diabetes care in the country. She brought all kinds of doctors together. The first summit ever that's happened at HCA like this. And that's where do you think she gets that from? This is not hard to figure out. So she has done some incredible things in her career that are just like Dad. And finally, her family. She and her husband Brent have raised and are raising to such an intentional level. It's never we didn't really know what to do, so we're just kind of hanging out. Oh my heavens. They are, again, the athleticism, the nutrition, the education, the every piece that she could possibly work at. That girl doesn't take a minute off. We still are like, good grief, Wendy, come on, sit down, have a drink, relax. Nope. That girl is on all the time. Again, just like my dad. Amazing. So, for those of you who are lucky enough to know Wendy and her family, she embodies the spirit of my father, and you don't have to look hard to find it. However, she doesn't have his nose. Only Adam and I got his nose. So, Adam also he inherited all kinds of brain cells too, from both of my parents, and earned himself a full ride to college, and I'm still going to give him a double major, whether he did that or not, because it makes a better story. Engineering and computer science. He also went to Ohio Northern. He played tennis also through high school, through college. I mean, this is like rinse and repeat, right? This is how our family is. Incredibly education focused, incredible athleticism, runs to this day, works out, plays golf, plays tennis, has done such an incredible job in this last couple of years as Wendy and I had moved down to Tennessee to keep Dad engaged, to get him to the game, to get him with some awesome pictures of him playing golf with Connor. He's just done amazing. My brother, also like my father, has a touch of an independent spirit, and he has joined a startup, and it was so wonderful to meet the folks from Fisher Company, where he has joined them and has really done incredible work with also his master's degree and all the problems that he solves and the people that he takes care of in the work that he does. And just like my father, he is an incredible dad with Stacy. There's so many fun things. They make life so much fun, from these crazy events that Stacy shares for birthdays, and man, it's not a casual, we're just gonna have a cake. No, you all know, big events for parties. It's really fun, and celebrations. But even my favorite part of Adam and Stacy and the way they raise their kids is that they pray with them at night, and they pray for all of us, and they pray for their parents, and it's that heartfelt, just real soul filling who they are and the kind of person that my brother is, so influenced by his father, and in the life that he is, and the father that he is, and the husband that he is, and that we all get to know them to be. So, again, if you have the opportunity to really spend time with my brother and my sister, you will meet my dad. You will know who he was and how he lived. A couple of other examples of this whole people can change, and they will, is all this exercise stuff, nutrition and exercise and golf and all that. I thought it was fun to remember. So he and my mom, they ran the 5 Mile Square. So ask my mom later if you want to know where the 5 Mile Square here is in Tip City, because I think all 3 of us kids started running with our parents, and that's where a bunch of all of that began. I want to move into another example of my dad's belief that people will change by talking a little bit about dentistry. So, some dentists believe that you better fill all the cavities because people won't change, and you know what you're just going to do? You might go back and you might not brush your teeth, and you certainly won't floss, and you won't change your behavior. And my dad doesn't believe that at all. And so what he did was he created this preventive care visit. And anyone who has worked with my dad knows this in incredible detail. So here's how this worked. So we called it the PC visit. And what you had to do, it's not like you just came into our office and you sat down and got your teeth cleaned. That was a tiny part of what was going on in our office. What would happen is, and this is for every single child forever, and a lot of the adults, if you felt like you needed this as well, and we needed it, let's be honest. So what would happen is, you would come into the office, and you would start at the, almost whether it was original bathroom sink or at our office, you know, kind of that area that we built with the sinks in the back. And he trained every single one of his staff to talk to you and to learn, who are you? What makes you a person? What's important to you? If you were a teenager, maybe it's getting a good date on Friday night. If you were an adult and you were looking for a job, maybe it was something about getting a good job and having a smile and teeth. Maybe if you were older, it was all about, man, we need to make sure that I can eat healthy because I have to take care of myself to be here for my family. But no matter what the reason is, every single hygienist, most of our assistants, and for certain our doctors had to understand this. But that you had to understand who that person was. It wasn't just a random patient and a set of teeth. Who was that person? And what would be important to that person and why they would want to take care of their smile and of their teeth. And then you had to have a contract. And if there is a hygienist in here that had to, there's Nakia. So, oh my goodness sake, how many people did Nakia have to train on this? So you had to have this contract of, okay, now that we know what's important to you, now then we agree, when are you going to do it, your brushing of your teeth, and how, you know, where and when, right? So that was the contract. And when you're getting trained on this, there was a whole checklist that you had to make sure that you hit all of the highlights, and every single hygienist had to record this to make sure that they got it right, and Dad listened to probably everyone, and Nakia probably listened to 85% of them, right? Anyway, to give you a sense of that, that is the level of detail that my dad put into his practice. Any other doctor that we have ever known, you hire a hygienist, they come in your office, they've already been trained, you don't have to tell them anything, they've already got the studies. Nope. And in fact, if you didn't pass all of those recordings and get signed off on how to do this preventive care visit, you are not allowed to see patients. You just flat weren't. So Dad would pay you, and until you could pass that, wouldn't even let you see the patients. Can you even imagine what kind of a person thinks at that level and has that level of belief and wants to know who you are to connect it to something that's important to you so that you would brush your silly teeth? So I also want to talk a little bit about this other lesson, that if you have been given gifts, that you are expected to use them. Like I mentioned, that was instilled from his parents very, very young. They recognized early on my dad had some serious intellectual horsepower. That man was seriously skilled. And with his big heart, he volunteered in Vietnam, to my mother's chagrin, of course. She told me, and I'm not sure I realized this, that he was most likely the northernmost dentist in South Vietnam. And on his weekends, he would go and treat the children. There is a really excellent story about him sinking an entire dental clinic. Wonderful. Only my dad. In fact, I'm pretty sure, like, I was chatting with some of the fellows the other night, and they said, yeah, I think he's the only one that could possibly have that story. They sunk an entire dental clinic in Vietnam. But that also really established the mission for our practice, which anyone who has worked with him knew. It was helping people help themselves, which really harkens back to the first, that he believed that we could really change based on the conversations we would have and the relationships that we would develop. So let's talk a little bit about dentistry, my favorite thing. I will tell you that, my My family has put up with my dad and I talking dentistry at every family event, every Christmas, everything. Like, they don't mind Dad and I like sneaking off into the corner so we can have our whole dental conversation. I've been joking with people last night. I'm like, so I'll be the one like in the corner, like wanting to talk about dentistry, and the rest of my family wondering, like, what is she muttering about? But so his history, and I'm going to share a little bit of that. Started in 1970, which was the year that I was born, with the practice 19 steps over the bank, and with some staff that stayed with him for 25, 30 years. Incredible. And then in 1977, he built the Tippecanoe Health Center that you all know and love and have been to probably many, many times. And when he built that building, the Tippecanoe Health Center, thus began his walking back and forth to work, carrying that briefcase for everyone to wave at him and say hello and stop him and show them their teeth and on and on and on, right? For almost 50 years, my father walked back and forth to work. His vision was so big, it was bigger than 5,000 square feet in the Tippecanoe Health Center. In 1987, my dad created an association with Good Samaritan Hospital and built another 5,000 square feet, and they changed the name as part of that joint effort to Health Park. And there was Health Park Dentistry, and there was Health Park Medical. And I want to tell you, that vision for integrated healthcare, guys, that's just happening right now. If you think about it, as cool as it is to like go in the Minute Clinic at Kroger, that's not integrated healthcare. We don't have it yet. Because I'm still in dentistry, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but Walmart just opened, only a few months ago, the very first integrated it's dental, vision, medical, all in, it's just outside of Atlanta. And my dad had that vision for Tipp City in 1987, and didn't just like think about how it might work. Built the building, got the hospital involved, worked with those physicians. Eventually, I don't know if Jen is here, of course, recruited a family friend physician, Jen Holler, Julian, to come and work. That is, again, such his love for this community and his vision for dentistry all coming together to all of our benefit. He also was one of the first in the country to develop a multi-specialty group practice dental group. That, again, friends, that hardly exists in the country when he's doing it. We had, at our heyday, we had 3 general dentists, including my dad. We had pediatric dentists. We had the only pediatric dentist in Miami County. We had an oral surgeon, a periodontist, and who am I missing? Orthodontist. You had every one of those specialists in the same building in Tipp City. This is not normal. This is not how dentists practice. They're all by themselves. They're known, I say this lovingly, doctors, right? Like independent solo cats. Like they don't play well always with others. And so here we all were, and complementary skills, and walk across, and Dad set all of that up. He was literally 20-some years ahead of his time with this vision, and not just a vision, the implementation. I do want to tell you that nothing like that comes easy. I had a front row seat. So if we continue the 7s, and I didn't even realize this until Mom and I are on the plane. So 77 to start the Tippecanoe Health Center, 87 to do Health Park, and I joined in 97. So that's a pretty nice little system. But I joined the practice because I was also going back for my master's degree and was all over the place, and Dad offered me a position to help come structure the business side of the practice while I went to school at night at University of Dayton. And we thought, we'll just work together a few years. I'll get my degree, we'll get them situated, and then I'll go off and do whatever I was gonna do. And after a few years, I was having so much fun. I saw all my friends at college, they were involved in marketing, or they worked in finance, or they worked in one piece of a business, and I worked in all of it. Dad and I would, and Mom, we would do any project that felt fun. So the division of labor for all those years was Dad, of course, leadership and clinical. Mom ran all of the accounting and finance and technology, and I then came in under management and operations. And the three of us enjoyed working together for 16 years. So for 16 years, every Monday I had lunch with my mother, and every Tuesday I had lunch with my father. And for a bunch of those years when we had our kids then, we also spent every summer weekend at the lake together, just us. Again, with other family and other friends, etc. But that is an incredible run of time together. And I would say I am incredibly grateful for the opportunity to really work with my father and really truly see the level of work that went into putting all of this practice together for everyone that is here, whether you worked with us as the doctors and staff, or whether you came to us as patients. It is very unusual, I think, for a child to get to really, truly get what their parents did for a living and really appreciate that. One side story that I watched over and over that I really enjoyed. So, just like Dan said, our dad was a smart fellow, and he was very successful in his practice. And occasionally we would get bankers and investment folks that would want to come in and make sure they could help him with that. And so my dad, as you guys very well know, he almost every day would wear some sort of blue button-down or polo shirt. He would wear khaki pants and those white tennis shoes every day. Not fancy, clearly. So we would watch these investment folks come in and want to talk to my dad about, well, I'm going to help you. And they would meet my dad. And of course, they were always tall. My dad was not so much. And so they would come in and they would meet us, and I would always get to sit in on the meeting. And we'd go back, you know, we'd always have it on that other side where it had a little bit of space. And I would watch them sit down, and they were all fancy in their suits and their very fancy shoes, and they would sit very comfortably looking at my dad thinking, I am going to get all of this man's money. I am going to take care of him, like whatever. And Mom would come to these early on, and we would just sit there and just be quiet because there wasn't anything we needed to say. I just would take some notes and enjoy what was going to happen. And my father very kindly, very lovingly would then start asking them about their understanding of Keynesian economics, and could they talk to him a little bit about their understanding of monetary policy, and could they forecast in specific what would be happening with the GDP and the interest rate, say over the next 6 months. And not surprisingly, he would already have this all written out that he would hand to them and say, so I'd like you to fill out a number of these statistics for me with your forecast for the next 6 months of how things are going to go in the economy. And just watching the body language of these poor investment bankers, and it wasn't one meeting. I mean, we had repeatedly people would come in, and they would have to, you know, they quickly moved to, oh, I need to pay attention, and then they're looking at this paper and they're saying, well, I can't forecast the, you know. And my dad would be like, well, if you're good at what you do, then I would expect that you'd be willing to write down what you believe will happen. I mean, it was so much fun. They would walk out of there kind of with their tail between their legs with homework to see if they could do that. So those are the kind of things that were so much fun to watch my small-statured father loom large over, just with his abilities and caring and thoughtfulness and preparation. I also wanted to share a couple of things that were really unique about the practice of dentistry and what we did here in Tipp City. The first one I want to talk about is the training levels. And I just have to do this. If you know about the training levels in any way, shape, or form, will you raise your hand? Oh, yeah. Okay, so let me tell you. So the training levels. This was an idea my dad, when we had Legionnaire's disease, he went to this conference in Colorado, and it was super, he realized we have got to be safer than we are. And that, of course, turned into really understanding about HIV. And so he wrote down at this conference every bit of sterilization procedures that we had to follow. It wasn't just to keep things clean. This was life or death importance. And so he wrote down for his assistants, what do we have to do to make sure that we keep our community safe and healthy? And from that, he kind of realized, hey, if this is important enough to keep everyone safe and healthy, and I want to write it down and take enough care for that, well then why wouldn't I write down what I want my hygienists to do and how I want them, as they work separate from me, to take care of my patients? And then he started writing, well, if I care what my assistants are doing and I care what my hygienists are doing, then I guess I should probably start writing down what my front desk team is doing. And this evolved over years. Thousands and thousands of pages, all written in pencil, on lined paper that we got in college, that he then organized into this level system. So not just what are the tasks, kind of a checklist, but organized, written in incredible detail, every single thing we needed to do in the office. And they would go from level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Every one of those teams. Can you even imagine writing all of that down? And then the changes. Inevitably, for our team, when it was early on, we also understood that everybody thinks they have a little bit harder job, right? I think the front desk is harder than the assistant hygienist is convinced it's more difficult, etc. And so he added an entire different level, the general levels, so that we could also make sure that it was a little more even, but then there was also all the people skills and all the things that we all needed to know and work on. And that was also totally flowed in with what we had to do with nutrition. Everyone knows that when you got to level 4, you got $100 towards some sort of fitness equipment. And so people really would want to make sure they got into level 4. We also incorporated all of the financial understanding. He wanted everyone not just to be healthy physically, but he wanted you to be healthy financially, not just with your career development and feeling good, but also with your understanding. And you can learn from all of us too. Adam and Wendy and I are going to be evangelizing about your living wills, because that made an incredible difference in the end for our Father, and making sure that we fulfilled his wishes. So if you have any questions about that, you all have homework. You go home right now and you make sure that you have a living will, that you know where it is, because our mom knows where everything is. We don't know where anything is. And but this vision, so I did want to tell you with these training levels, and I actually talked about this the other night a little bit, with these training levels. So when I moved to Tennessee, I was convinced that instead of, it was funny, when we would have they got so big, right, that it used to be when you get started working with us, we had to buy you a tote bag, because we're going to give you 100 pages of the level you were going to work in, and 100 pages of the general level, and that weighed quite a bit. So I'm thinking, man, we've got to get this online. And that is something that I actually tried to do, is to put these training levels online so that other practices wouldn't have to take the time to write all of this down, and we could help other practices the way that ours grew so successfully. I wasn't nearly as successful at that as I wish I would have been, but it is interesting. Those have not gone away. We have another company that is still talking. He's been talking with Dad and I about still trying to do something and get those levels online, and so that hasn't died. The last dental story of what we did at Health Park I wanted to tell you about, that Dan actually got a little exposure to, is the Baldridge Award. And again, this goes into, if you have these skills, then you are expected to use them. So my dad learned about this Baldridge process, I think even before I graduated college. So for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure my family has heard this story like a billion times, so Malcolm Baldrige was a fellow that went to Japan after World War II and helped them restructure their economy, especially the car industry. He did, considering Toyota, etc., he did a pretty good job. And so we wanted him to come back here to the States, and he really had an incredible influence excellence in our country, and they established the Malcolm Baldrige Award. And what this was, is that you would write a 50-page application where you had to explain and talk about leadership and strategy, workforce development, customer focus, business processes, and results. In fact, the whole second half of this application is that you had to prove that you were achieving results. So my dad didn't have just a vision for this. He wanted to make sure we were getting measurable outcomes out of the work that we were doing in a dental practice in Tip City, Ohio. So the way that would work is every year we would write this 50-page application and type it and type it and type it and redo it and fix it and do all those wonderful things. And then it would go to a team. They were specifically trained in this Baldrige approach. They would then come to the office, they'd interview all of us, and then they would give us a feedback report, and you get some level of recognition, some sort of award. And he started that in 1992, and we did that in the Dayton area, and just kind of step by step our way up. And in 1999, we won the top Malcolm Baldrige Award in Dayton, Ohio. And we took all of our staff, and we had all the pictures, and it was a real accomplishment. There were no other dental practices that would apply for a Malcolm Baldrige Award. And after that, well, then it was next, continuous improvement, right? And we had to go to the state level. And so at the state level, we would again write the application and fill it in and do this whole process. And we can't find these awards. We have these beautiful awards, and if you've been in our office and saw that cabinet, these colored glass awards, that's what we won for getting recognized at the state level for this Baldrige process. He took these ideas of the Baldrige, he took them into everything that he did. He would take them into the schools. He would take them into the United Way. In fact, humorously, even he was deciding that he might need some home health care at some point, so he was interviewing home health agencies and then realized, well, they didn't really know what they were doing with preventive care and how they could really help people. So he turned that around and was going to start coaching them. He was interviewing them to then have them consult on how he was going to help them, because he said to us, they didn't really know how much they really need me to help them, and they'll probably be paying me. I'm like, of course they will, Dad. Of course they'll be paying you. He sold the practice only 18 months ago, and I'm so thankful that he did, and that practice is still ongoing, and all of my team are still there and taking care of patients. And I wanted to also share that it's not just the legacy that he is leaving of his family. It's not just the legacy he's leaving of that beautiful building and that practice where so many are practicing dentistry and caring for thousands of people in our community. It's also not only all of the dental lives that he has touched. So many doctors, so many of our team members have reached out, and we got to talk to last night. We all learned, as much as Dad would make every one of us completely crazy, everyone learned so much. They acknowledged that they have changed and they have this incredible impact thanks to my dad. And I am the same way. So I wanted to also let you know. So I now get to work for a dental software company, and I have customers that I have a customer that has 500 offices. I'm doing a pilot with a group. It's the largest in the country. They have 1,000 dental offices. And I'm in this incredibly unique situation that I've taken all of this learning that I got from my dad and from working in our practice, and I've only been in this company less than 3 years. I'm taking the idea of getting measurable outcomes for patient health, and we're putting that, I'm gonna get that into my software, because I've already had the opportunity to change that software already from what I know of all the measures we did for the Baldrige. Like, I know how to run those reports, and I've got them pre-built in this new software now. So I actually have been working with the American Dental Association And Henry Schein Dental, which has 22,000 employees, just so happened to be in the right place with this vision and this background from my dad, that I know exactly what we need to do to get this into this software. And the neat thing about the software is because it's cloud-based, as soon as it's there, it'll be available for every single practice immediately. It's not like you have to wait and get it installed in everybody's office. No, when we run a release, it's everywhere, immediately. And you know what my job is? I get to work with all the largest group practices in the country and help them use the software successfully. So what do you think I'll get to do? Help everybody find exactly where that report is so they know how healthy their patients are. Do you know there is nothing in our field, there is no dental software that measures patient health? None. Not one. We measure how many of you come or how old you are or when your last billing was or did you get sealants. We can run all of those reports, but there's nothing that measures your health, and we did that thanks to the Baldridge. So even now, and as I'm looking at my dad out there, I'm telling him, oh, we have so many more good things we're gonna do. You have no idea what fun things we are gonna do. And in fact, I have had the opportunity recently, just went to a meeting in our corporate office, and I had such an incredible situation where they honored me for the work that I was doing. And because of that, and what a special conversation and situation that was for me, I got home, and on my drive home from the airport, I called Dad. This is last Sunday. What's today? It's Friday. It was last Sunday. I called my dad and said, oh my gosh, I gotta tell you about this trip. This is what happened. And again, like I have done, just so you guys know, I have said this to my dad and my mom over and over and over. Thanks to you, thanks to working with you, thanks to learning from you, look at what I'm able to do. Look at what I'm able to influence. And I wouldn't have done any of that. I wouldn't know how to do that without having worked with my parents for all of those years. And that was the last conversation that my dad and I had together. It was where I got to tell him again, look how awesome this is. Look what you did. And give him all that credit. So as you can tell, I would like to stay here all day and just talk about my dad. And I probably could. If I could lock you all in here from now on, I just would. Because I don't want this time of honoring my dad to end. I have so appreciated every one of you, everybody that came last night. And I want to share one last lesson. And because everything my dad was always, written down, there was nothing my dad didn't write. You all have this homework in front of you. So if you'll get out your little bulletin, I'm going to read to you this story, this last lesson that we are going to take from my dad today. And in fact, my brother said that in the last couple of months, my dad specifically told my brother this story 6 or 8 times just in the last couple of months. So he was really feeling this. So this is the story called The Zen Master. On his 16th birthday, the boy gets a horse as a present. All of the people in the village say, oh, how wonderful. And the Zen Master says, we'll see. One day the boy is riding and gets thrown off the horse and hurts his leg. He's no longer able to walk, and so all the villagers say, how terrible. And the Zen Master says, we'll see. Some time passes and the village goes to war. All of the other young men get set off to fight, but this boy can't fight because his leg is messed up. And all the villagers say, how wonderful. And the Zen Master says, we'll see. So, I have to say that even though my dad isn't here anymore, I'm sure that Zen Master would say, and we had so many people really try to spin this sort of to the positive as best you can, that he would never have wanted to linger on like his parents did. That maybe having this end quickly, that may very well have been a situation just like this Zen Master where, we'll see if maybe that wasn't the right way for that to go. So thank you so much for letting me take so much of
stand up if that's okay with everybody. So, first of all, Pastor Dan asked if anyone else had ever had the experience of being sized up by Chuck. You might try marrying one of his kids. A few of us had that experience, and I think we were still being sized up, even after all these years. But I'm, as I think about, so I'm Brent Gay, Wendy's husband, Chuck's son-in-law. And so as Chuck passed, I thought about, what can I do? It's not really my nature to say a lot, but I wanted to really help Wendy understand what he meant to me, not just because of the way that he and Lorraine shaped, the most important person in the world to me, but also just the personal relationship I had with him was really special. And it wasn't really hard to write it down. The hardest part was writing it in past tense. It's just a light that bright. You just want to believe that it's going to shine forever, and I think it will. And I think it will through the stories that all of you have told us, and I think all of you are going to continue to tell those stories. We're never going to get tired of listening to them. And so I do think his light will shine on that way. But Wendy asked me, and the rest of the family said it's okay if I just read some of the thoughts that I had. I want to tell my side of Chuck's story. You asked the question, what did Chuck Smith mean to you? And to me, he meant a lot. And so I hope you'll bear with me as I just read from some of those thoughts. So as I reflect on Chuck's life, one of the first words that comes to mind to me is legacy. More than anyone I've ever known, Chuck cared about the legacy he would leave behind, and it was really never far from his mind. He was always thinking about that. As you may know, for him, it wasn't about being remembered for anything personally, but the legacy of the impact he would have on the world. That's really how he thought about it. He didn't want his name on buildings. Anyone who knew him knew he wouldn't want that. His legacy was defined by the number of people that he could help. And when he wasn't directly helping people, he was tirelessly trying to make himself better so he could help as many more as he could, as well as he could, for as long as he could. Despite being the least vain person I've ever known, and those of you who know him, Chuck always cared. He wanted to be neat and look nice, but if it weren't for Lorraine, there's a good chance his clothes might not have matched. But he wanted to stay physically fit because really for him, one, it was about discipline. That's just what you did. But two, it was really about keeping his stamina up so that he could continue to care for people well into his 70s, just as he did. And it worked. He was a force of nature, as you've heard, in every way. He also read insatiably, as many of you know. Many of you have received articles from him that he thought you might have been interested in, and I was lucky enough to be on the receiving end of many of those. And I know I only got probably a fraction of what he read, but there was no way I could get to all of it. But when I think about his legacy, he did have a tremendous impact. From seemingly small things like taking an emergency call on a Saturday night so someone didn't have to endure a Sunday of pain, to big things like, as Jill talked about, to pushing the practice of dentistry by making it more about patients and less about profit. Because of who he was, he probably wasn't capable of being satisfied with the legacy he's leaving behind now. If he were here, he'd probably say something like, if I only had 5 more years I could have, and the list would have gone on. But just look around here. Much of his legacy is represented here. So many of you have a story, big or small, about how Chuck made your lives better or made you smile, and how you would have loved to hear all those stories and how you're doing. The families love hearing it, and please keep sharing. Part of the foundation for Chuck's legacy was his calling to dentistry. He was one of those rare people who found what he was meant to do in life. As Wendy has said so many times, from his disarming manner to those piercing small hands to those piercing blue eyes, he was born to be a dentist. No doubt, countless patients who came into Health Park filled with anxiety over the years could not help but be comforted by those wise and caring blue eyes looking back at them. It is often said that the eyes are the window into the soul, and at his core, Chuck was a gentle soul who was put on this earth to care for people and ease their pain. But he was so much more than just a dentist. but for me, and no doubt for many other people, he was the essence of what a dentist should be. One of my favorite quotes is from Abraham Lincoln. It was, whatever you are, be a good one. And he was. If there was ever a better dentist, I haven't met him. He was a good one. Anyone who knew him or talked to him for 5 minutes knew the other and most important foundation to Chuck's legacy was his family, which of course started with his marriage. Nobody could accomplish all that Chuck did without a healthy ego, but Chuck knew to his core that he couldn't have done any of it without Lorraine. Of course, he loved telling the story of Health Park, but he always used the phrasing, and he was careful about this, Lorraine and I, when telling it, always. He told me and countless others, whether Lorraine was in earshot or not, that without her accounting and technology expertise and general ability to keep the chains running on time, Health Park could never have grown to help the thousands of patients who came through those doors over the years. Like I do, Chuck often saw the world through the lens of sports, and Lorraine was the best teammate he could have ever hoped for in his business and in his life. And nothing made him more proud than the knowledge that his legacy would live on through the kids the two of them raised together. As you certainly heard from Jill as well, it's not hard to see his best qualities in his 3 kids. Starting with my beautiful wife, Wendy, she was the unstoppable force to Chuck's immovable object. There is no doubt that God has a sense of humor, and I know Chuck enjoyed the fact that perhaps one of the few people on earth who could match his tenacity and his stubbornness was his own middle daughter, who often directed those qualities right back at him. But beyond that, he was so proud of her, and Jill talked about some of the reasons why. He was so proud of the work she has done as a pharmacist, and more recently, her work to improve diabetes care in hospitals across the United States. Even if he didn't always understand what she did, it's complicated stuff. I think the thing that made him most proud was why Wendy does what she does and why she works so hard at it. Because it's the same why that drove him for so many years. He was so incredibly proud of her as a parent. Like all of us, he marveled at how she's been able to have the impact she's had in her career in healthcare while always putting her kids' needs first, and mine. While I obviously don't have the front row seat to their lives that I do Wendy's, you don't have to look hard to see the best of him in Jill and Adam too. Chuck had this wonderful ability to make you feel like the most important person in the world when you talk to him. I think anybody who ever sat in a dentist chair with him felt that. He always had this famous line, "Tell me a story." And he said it with the kind of enthusiasm that made you feel like there was nothing more important in the world, nothing more genuinely exciting to him than hearing what you had to say about your life. This gift is no doubt in part why he was so well loved by so many people, and it is a gift, along with that majestic Smith nose that he passed along to Jill. And while I don't remember her saying, "Tell me a story," exactly, anytime you're with Jill, you get that feeling that despite her full plate of being a wife, mom, professional, and many other things, she is genuinely fascinated to hear about your life, just like Chuck was. And with Chuck-like enthusiasm, she genuinely wants to hear what you think about whatever challenge she's working on. And you couldn't be in a room for long with Chuck without laughing. There was nothing that was music to his ears more than the whole family together creating a chorus of that unmistakable Smith laughter. His humor had a unique combination of sharp wit, corniness, and innocence, and it always seemed to make people feel good, even if it wasn't always, funny. There is no doubt that Adam got this quality, and the majestic Smith nose. But he has added a healthy dose of actual funny to the mix. And Adam has the exact same mischievous twinkle in his eye that his dad did. And like his dad, Adam's jokes and his laughter have made so many good times better, and the few tough times, like now, a little more bearable. Lastly, I learned so much from Chuck, but the one thing he taught me that stands out the most was the way he looked at the world. Chuck was the eternal optimist, and no matter where he looked, he saw limitless possibilities. First and foremost, he saw the possibility in people, all of them. Didn't matter who you are. He saw something. And while I wasn't there, I know he saw so much potential in his bright, capable kids from the time you guys were very young. He saw what you could become so clearly that he helped you see it too. And look at all of you now. Thinking about the possibilities of what his grandkids would become gave him tremendous joy in his later years. I can only hope they achieve the success and happiness he saw in his crystal ball for them. I take comfort in knowing he'll be there rooting for them every step of the way. He also saw the possibilities in every situation he encountered, whether it was Health Park, the American Dental Association, the Tip City Schools, the church, the Ohio State Dental Board, and the list goes on. I'll never forget the last conversation I had with him, the last long conversation I had with him when he was at our house for Thanksgiving. He was telling me about some in-home senior care companies he was talking to. I remember being a little confused by this initially because he didn't really know because he didn't really need that kind of care at this point in his life, although it wasn't unlike Chuck to plan ahead. But as I should have known, he didn't think he needed their help. He was trying to help them. Brent, they just don't quite get it, he said. They could do so much more for people than they are. He told me about the business plan he was going to write for them, which, mind you, they did not ask for. About how they could collaborate to increase their reach and improve their process for identifying and meeting each patient's escalating care requirements. I don't know if he ever got a chance to write that, but I sure would love to read it, and I'm sure it would do them some good to read it too. So in Chuck's memory, I'm going to work a little harder to see the possibilities in people and circumstances. It's easy to get consumed by managing the realities of each day's to-do list, but the possibilities are where the good stuff is. I don't know if I can match his imagination or his vision, but if I can have half as much trying as he did, it will be well worth a shot. Thank you.
When Jill brought up the 9 steps of training, I have those too now. They're in my office. He was making me read them. The family has asked to hear your stories too. Some of those stories might be verbal right now. We're going to invite you, if you'd like to just where you're at, to just a moment of time, a touch in your life with his, because you embody his legacy. You embody that. The other way is for at lunch, there's going to be cards out in the middle of the tables for you to write that down. That would be incredibly important and precious for this family, that to be able to read, signed by you, just a short excerpt of something that you and Chuck had in common or something that you experienced together. But right now, I'd just like to take a moment and see if there are a few that would like to stand where you are and just honor Chuck and his life with your words. Is there anyone? And I'll come with the microphone.
My grandson, Carson, he's about 11, and I had taken him over to Health Park to get his tooth. He had a terrible toothache. I was over at the lake with Lorraine, and my granddaughter called and said that Carson had this terrible toothache. I could hear him screaming in the background. So she called the dental park, bless her heart, and got me an appointment right away. And there was only enough time for me to rush home from the lake and drive to Troy, get it, and drive back to Tip City. So we just made it in time, and they took him right in and looked at him and took care. Didn't really take care of it too. They sent me to another spot to get it taken care of, and they took care of it, just whatever it was. Now I can't really remember. They took care of it, and then they pulled it. They pulled it, and it just kept bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. They said, use this tea bag on it, right? We went through a box of tea bags on his tooth, which you're supposed to keep back there, but kept coming forward. And so it was getting late, and it just kept bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. And I thought, what am I going to do? You know, this has got to stop. And I'm upset. Of course, he's really upset, crying. And so I said, I'm going to call Dr. Smith. I hated to call him, you know, because it's late then. 11, maybe, I don't know. And I called him, and he was so kind on the phone. He took care of all that I called. He was just so kind. But he said, just keep putting those tea bags in there. Oh gosh, it was horrible. But we did, but he was so kind on the phone and thoughtful, he didn't care at all that I called. So that's my story.
Anyone else?
I'm Dave. I met Chuck 7 years ago when I went to interview at Health Park when Jill was moving on. And meeting him changed my life. He's an incredible mentor. And I always kind of laugh about, I never wanted to get a job in dentistry. And when I met Jill and Chuck, the passion they had for how they took care of people, I'm like, I need to work at this place. And he put me through a crazy interview process. I remember getting 20 Baldrige questions sent to me and said, you can go ahead and answer 4. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to answer all of them. How about that? And that was a several-month process. But he was such a special guy. He was almost like a father to me. He taught me so much. I loved his passion for patients, for staff, for people. His dedication to continual improvement is just something that I'll always carry with me. And every time I pick up a yellow pencil, I thank him. And if you don't know this, all he ever used were yellow pencils. And he's like, Dave, put your pen down, you need to use one of these. Yes. Yellow pencils everywhere. Yellow mechanical pencils. And just one of the, I have a million stories because I've been with him for 2.5 hours every week. But I remember the first month, 6 months of my job there, and I sent Jill a text message. Snow? The parking lot. And Jill's like, oh my God, I forgot to tell you. He goes crazy over the parking lot, and then they saw it because we got like 1/4 inch of snow. And it was like his reaction, it was so funny. You really have to be there, it was more between me and Jill, but he was just an amazing guy. He'll be missed, and his legacy will live on. And Lorraine, love you like your mom. Thank you.
We have another mic on that side if there's somebody that would like. Anyone else? I started this morning by saying this is a very special and very important time, and it has been, and will continue as we are honored to have the Naval Honor Guard, Military Honor Guard, is going to close this ceremony out in the parking lot with military honors. So following this service, we're inviting you to join us out in the parking lot for a 21 gun salute and closing military honors. And then you are again then invited back in across the way in the Great Hall for lunch to continue with the stories over a meal with family and write some of those stories down and hand them to them. Would you pray with me as we close out? God, we love you. We thank you for all that you have blessed us with even in this day. For the gift of joy in the days of health and the strength, and for the gifts of your abiding presence in days of pain and grief. We praise you for home and friends and our place in your church with all those who have faithfully lived and died. Above all else, we thank you for Christ, who knew our grief, who died our death and rose for our sake, and who lives and prays for us constantly. Amen. Receive now Charles Chuck Smith into your arms of mercy. Raise him up with all your people. Receive him, us also, and raise us into new life. Help us so to love and serve you in this world, that we may enter into your joy in the world to come. Amen. Thank you, Lord. Enjoy as we leave today the naval anthem.
Do you want to follow us out then?